I'm Pam Kingsley. I am the chair of the Town of Poughkeepsie Conservation Advisory Commission. And this is the last in our speaker series, It Takes a Town, looking at different issues that have to do with our interaction with the local environment. And today we are going to be looking at invasive species in our gardens, in our environment, how to ID and how to prevent them from getting there, and how to ID them if they are there, and how to deal with them if you have ID'd them. And we have joining us today, we have Bronwyn Pappas Byers and Echo Hertzberg. They are both have degrees in environmental studies from Vassar. And they are going to join us and they are going to educate us this evening. So I ask you all to please take it away. And again, everybody make sure you're muted. We will, at the end of this presentation, we'll open up for questions. You can feel free to put questions in the chat as we go along. You don't have to wait till the end. Or once they have finished their presentation, you can raise your hand and you'll be recognized, and we'll make sure that everybody's questions are answered. So anyway, thanks so much for joining us tonight, and you all, the floor is yours.
Cool. All right. Just get our screen share going. Yep. Can everyone see that? Yes? Okay, lovely. I'm gonna minimize this so that we can see everything. Yeah, so hi, I'm Echo. This is Bronwyn, and we're gonna be talking about invasive species prevention and management in your garden and backyard, focusing specifically on plants. Yeah, so we are both interns with the Lower Hudson Prism, which is funded by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. So yeah, we're stationed at Vassar's Ecological Preserve. Mm-hmm. So yeah. Okay, how do we go to the next slide? There we go. Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, so we just wanted to start a little bit with terminology because we're not entirely sure like how familiar everybody is with the concept of invasive species, and also there's like a lot of debate going on with a lot of these terms within the field, so just kind of give you guys a glimpse at that. So kind of like the first word that we want to talk about is the term native, especially in the context of native plants, since we're focusing on plants for this presentation. So native species are species that have been established in a particular region for a really long time, with lots of ties to the local ecology. This is a really difficult to define term because species can become extinct in an area and then be brought back from another area. Species move all around the world. Evolution happens all the time. So this can be very difficult to define, but we're going to use it just kind of very broadly, as has been here a long time and has lots of close ecological ties. And on the other hand, there is, we're going to use the term non-native to mean an intentionally or unintentionally introduced species in a region. So this is a species that hasn't been here for a very long time, maybe just hundreds of years, maybe just tens of years. So this is a relative newcomer to the ecosystem. We're also going to use the term naturalized. This is a particular type of non-native species that has beneficially or benignly integrated into the local ecology. So this word is really meant to describe like benefits or just like has meshed well into the local plant and wildlife communities. So an example of this might be like clover. Most clover is from Europe, but it has worked out really well here. It feeds a lot of bees, and it overall like doesn't have any like setbacks in the ecology. Yeah, some of the vegetables that we eat too have been beneficial to both pollinators here and also humans. So those have also been naturalized, don't really cause much damage or anything like that. Exactly. Another term that we use is the term opportunistic, which this can be a native or a non-native species. whose population or size will expand significantly when given the necessary resources to do so. So this is just a species that can wait until there's some kind of resource available. It could be light, it could be soil space, it could be water, it could be a particular nutrient, whatever it is. When they get what they need to thrive, they really thrive and can do so in a way that might be a detriment to other plants surrounding it. It might shade out other plants. It may proliferate a lot. It doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, it just means it's doing what it knows how to do. Similarly, people use the term invasive. This is a particular type of opportunistic organism. It usually refers to non-native species, but there are some native species that have been classified as invasive. I'm thinking about poison ivy is native to here. However, it can grow pretty prolifically in the forest gaps that have been created. So this is sometimes considered an invasive species, sometimes not. But in general, an invasive species is one that outcompetes, damages, or suppresses native species, therefore reducing local biodiversity and ecosystem integrity. So an invasive species really is just a plant that is in the wrong place at the wrong time. There's a lot of issues with using the term invasive, thinking about the idea that like plants or newcomers are invading a place. We're kind of lacking in better language to talk about it. So this is what we have, and with that caveat, we're going to use the term invasive moving forward.
Yeah, and on the note of like using the term invasive species and just general notes on language within the fields and how we talk about these species, we're also going to like problematize using the terms like exotic to describe them, because it's important to keep in mind that these plants are native to a place. It's just not here. So it really just depends on where they are and their evolutionary history. So we're going to talk a little bit about how they become invasive relative to the region they're located in. So they basically will originate in places with comparable climates to the new region in which they get established, where they become invasive species. So if you take a look at the map on the left, that green climate band covering like some of North America and the Eastern US is very comparable to that of Western Europe and Eastern Asia, which is where, that's not what I wanted to say, Eastern Europe and Western Asia, my bad. So that's where a lot of the plants we're talking about today come from. So it's important to recognize that like the climates are very similar. That's how they're able to find the resources that they need here. However, because they don't really have any evolutionary ties to this region, because they are relatively newcomers, they will grow prolifically here because they don't really have any native predators in the area to keep their populations in check. So they're considered to be brought by people traveling between continents, oftentimes accidentally, and other times they're brought over ornamentally because they're very beautiful. A lot of them are very beautiful, and with people traveling around, they bring them over because they're edible also. Got to bring food if you're gonna go to a new place. So yeah. And with that, we'll get to going over some basic plant ID terms so that you can have that vocabulary to be able to describe what you're seeing.
Yeah, so like the first vocab that we're going to start with is what we call growth forms, which is just kind of like the shape that a plant takes on. And knowing these is going to help you kind of like differentiate between different plants so you can correctly ID the invasive ones that are in your backyard. So the four kind of like main growth forms are herbaceous, vine, shrub, and tree. An herbaceous plant is any plant that doesn't produce wood, so it dies back every winter. It has like a soft stem, they're kind of crunchy. Most of the vegetables that you eat are herbaceous. You can see the term herb in there. Also, like most of the flowers that you grow. You can kind of see in this picture on the left, like a cottage garden is almost entirely herbaceous plants. There's also vine growth, which you guys know what a vine looks like. There can be woody ones and there can be herbaceous ones, but generally it can't support itself. It needs to grow up and over things. There's shrubs, which really what distinguishes that is that it has multiple stems. And they're typically pretty short. Some people say that shrubs are 20 feet or less. Some people say 15, 10. It's up for debate. But generally it just means multi-stemmed, kind of short. And a tree is exactly what everybody knows a tree to be. It has one stem and it's very tall. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, so within these growth structures, we're gonna look at how leaves are arranged on branches. So we'll start off with simple versus compound leaves. So if you're looking at a plant and you're checking for simple versus compound, you wanna look at the place where the leaves come out of the branch. So that's called the leaf bud. If it's just like one leaf that comes out, that's a simple leaf. Good examples are oaks and maples. When they fall down in the fall, it's just like those single leaves that kind of float down. Whereas with compound leaves, if you look at the leaf bud, it'll look like multiple leaves are coming out of that bud at the same time, but they're all coming out in the same growth form, same pattern throughout that branch. And then when they fall down in the autumn, they kind of just come down as the entire thing. So that entire like structure is what's referred to as a leaf. The smaller leaf-shaped things that are coming off of this diagram are referred to as leaflets. And we'll go over some examples of that in a bit. So to continue with some further leaf arrangement, so after you kind of check the buds and figure out, okay, simple versus compound, now you look at how they're arranged on the branch. So the key ones we're gonna look at are alternate, spiral, opposite, and whorled leaves. So if you check a branch, alternate leaf arrangement is going to be where the leaves just kind of come out on opposite sides of the branch, like kind of one at a time. So they'll alternate, like one comes out and then you go a little bit further down the branch and then another one will come out. As opposed to, I'm gonna move to opposite leafing real quick. These leaves will come out in pairs and they'll kind of be like evenly distributed throughout the branch, and they will not they're kind of flat as opposed to spiral leaves. So like opposite comes out in pairs flat along the branch, whereas spiral leaves, they're also kind of paired, but they'll come out at like different angles and kind of like a three-dimensional shape around the branch, if that makes sense. And then with whorled leaf shapes, they'll come out in bunches around the stem. And we'll see a pretty good example of one of those in one of the plants we're going to go over. So you will be able to see that distinguishing leaf arrangement.
Yeah, so once you've kind of looked at all of these different like growth forms and the way the leaves are arranged, the last thing that you can do to ID plants is to look at their leaf venation. And there's really just three that you need to know. They're parallel, pinnate, and palmate. Parallel is exactly what it sounds like. You have veins on the leaves that all run parallel to each other. If you've ever like ripped up a piece of grass, this is like a really great example. Like a lot of grasses have parallel leaf venation. Pinnate leaf venation is kind of like if you were to draw like a cartoony leaf, you'd probably be drawing a pinnate leaf. It has a singular vein in the middle, just one, and it kind of looks like a pin. I think that's where the name comes from. And then it has like smaller veins coming off of that. And then a palmate one is just a, if it's not parallel and it has multiple major veins coming out from the point where it attaches to the rest of the tree. That's called palmate. It looks like a palm.
Yeah.
You have lots of different fingers coming out from the same point.
Yeah, good example of a palmate leaf would be, if y'all know what maple leaves look like, those are a pretty good example of what a palmate leaf venation looks like.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're gonna go over 5, really 6, but 2 of them are very closely related. So 5 like important invasive species that you might see in your backyard or you might be tempted to buy at a nursery. So these are things to look out for.
Yeah, so first one we're going to start off with is roundleaf bittersweet, Celastris urbiculatus. I just want to make a quick note about naming on this one. I think it is more commonly known as oriental bittersweet. That's how it's taught to us in the field. We're trying to move away from using the term oriental because it's pretty racist. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to drop them in the chat, but we're just going to stick to using roundleaf bittersweet. So basic plant ID for this guy. So key thing with bittersweet is that it's a woody stem twining vine. It's really kind of destructive because it'll grow in forest gaps where there's a lot of light, and because it's a woody stem twiner, it will weigh down the trees and kind of pull them down and create even more light gaps where it can proliferate even more. So what you really want to look for with like older growth is this like, if you look at the picture on the top right, it's this like really distinct stem twining around itself or around other things. It'll just wrap around a trunk. If you want to look at like the newer growth that hasn't yet become woody, you want to look for the simple, very round pinnate leaves that you can see on the picture on the left. And with round leaf bittersweet, it's also got like a sawtooth edge around the leaf. So it's not like smooth, it's got like little teeth around it. And then if you are looking at it in the fall, the berries are kind of like bright orange. So they have like a red cap and they split open and it's like orange, and you can also cut the stem and it'll be orange as well, and it will stain your fingers. And we're not going to go over leaf arrangement for this one because it's got a lot of exceptions. It kind of just does whatever it wants. There's not really any way to say like this is an alternate structure, like an opposite structure. It's kind of just has a high variability in that sense. So yes.
Yeah, so there is a lookalike that I kind of want to warn you guys about, but it's not so much something that you need to think about here in New York. But there is an American bittersweet as opposed to the round leaf bittersweet. The American bittersweet behaves very similarly, except that it has native predators, which is why it does not behave invasively, but it does twine around trees and it is a vine. It has kind of pointy leaves, and the berries will occur in clusters at the end instead of along the whole length of the part of the vine that they're growing from. But the reason why you're not really going to see this in New York is because the American bittersweet and the roundleaf bittersweet, they hybridize, and so the American bittersweet has kind of lost its genetic integrity. There really isn't a true species of American bittersweet on like this half of the continent, as far as I know. Maybe there's a few in the Midwest. So you're not really going to see it here, and most of it is going to behave like a roundleaf bittersweet. But I just thought you guys should know about that. You might see it if you're traveling, and you might be tempted to pull it out, but no, it's actually a native species that's a really important part of our ecology.
Yeah. All right, the next one that we're going to go over is common mugwort, Artemisia vulgaris. You probably might have heard of this plant. It's, I feel like, a pretty common a plant that's used in herbalism, maybe. It also just grows on the side of the roads here, like everywhere. And it also really likes open fields. But basically, with mugwort, it'll form like giant monocultures of itself and kind of just take over fields and outcompete a lot of plant communities that support pollinators, which just kind of harms the local ecosystem and also threatens food production. So basically with mugwort, what you want to look for is these kind of feathery looking leaves. They are pinnate. They've got like lobes coming off of them, like on the middle picture, like so you got that central vein, and then you have like a lobe here, a lobe here, a lobe here, kind of like a maple leaf, but very lobed. And they've got like even more lobes on the lobes. So I don't know, to me it looks kind of feathery, and the leaves are a little bit wrinkly and fuzzy. You also want to look for the stems, which are tend to be like pretty purplish and also fuzzy. Another way that I like to ID mugwort is to smell it. I'm a kind of a strange human, but I think mugwort smells amazing. And I feel like once you've smelled it one time, you can like, if you see something that looks like it, you pick it and you smell it and you're like, huh, yes, that's definitely mugwort. But here's just some fun photos of like, so you can see the monocultures, and then there's also like just a person for reference of like how tall it can get. and shade out other herbaceous things that grow in open fields.
Yeah, so there is a native lookalike that you guys might confuse with mugwort. Not to scare you guys, but it usually is mugwort, to be honest. But there is the common ragweed, which is Ambrosia artemisifolia is the Latin. I may have pronounced that wrong. My Latin is non-existent. But this plant is kind of like a lighter yellowish green as opposed to like the dark green and purple that is more characteristic of mugwort. It has like narrower leaves and the leaves are smoother. So if you look at the picture on the right that's up close on the leaves, you can see that there's a lot of lobes, just like the mugwort, but there's not as many like lobes on the lobes, if that makes sense. And the leaves aren't quite as fuzzy. And the stem can be a little fuzzy, but not quite to the same degree. It also tends to grow not as tall as mugwort, and it tends to grow out. And so this plant lives here. It is good. It has lots of close relationships with things in the ecology. Mugwort is from Europe, and it does not have really anything that eats it yet. So yeah.
Goats will eat it because
Yes.
goats eat everything, but you know.
So yeah, the next species that we want to talk a little bit about, and this one's kind of notorious in the field, is Japanese knotweed. The Latin for this is Falopia japonica. However, there is also a hybrid version that is Japanese knotweed hybridized with giant knotweed that grows around here. I really can't tell the difference in terms of IDing them. They look really the same to me, and there really isn't any native plant that looks like either of these. So we're kind of like bunching them here together. But basically how you ID this plant is it has alternate simple leaves. So if you look at the picture in the middle on the top, you can see that it has one leaf and then the next one, and then they don't occur in pairs, but they occur like taking turns along the stem. The leaves are kind of like a very generic leaf shape. They kind of look like a cartoony leaf. So they're simple.
Pinnate.
Yeah,
It's
they're
a good
pinnate.
example of a pinnate
Yeah,
leaf.
they have like a single vein down the middle. They tend to zigzag on the stem. The stem kind of like changes direction every time that it has a new leaf.
It's pretty distinctive.
Yeah, if you're looking at it in the spring, you might see these like kind of like long upright strands of flowers. Compound flower just means there's a lot of little flowers that occur together. You can see those on the bottom left. They're very pretty. And also this is an herbaceous plant as opposed to a woody plant. So this has a hollow stem. If you like chopped it, you could look through it. Kind of like a straw. And so this dies back to the ground every year. Why this is of particular concern is that it can grow through literally anything. It can grow through concrete. It can grow through asphalt. It can grow through the foundation of your house. It is a really strong plant. It is really good at what it does. The other thing that it is really good at is that if you were to mow it, say with a mower or a weed whacker or something, the fragments of the stem and roots will actually re-root themselves. And so as people in our field have learned, trying to control it can actually make it worse.
Yeah, it just spreads clonally.
Yes.
And yeah, it's just really hard to deal with.
All of the species of true Japanese knotweed in this country are actually all from the same plant. They're all clones of one plant that was just mowed and moved around, and now it is everywhere. This is something you'll see in a lot of like drainage ditches on the side of the road, especially.
Yeah, it's adapted to live in like wet soils. So if like wet places tends to have pretty sizable populations of Japanese knotweed.
Yeah. But it's pretty distinctive looking because it has kind of like a segmented growth form, and it is very pretty in my opinion.
Yeah, like reddish stems, reddish green mottled stems.
Yeah,
it's like, yeah, also another ID thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all right, so the next two species we're gonna go over are two kinds of barberry. They're very, very similar, and they're both considered invasive here. So the first one I want to go over is Japanese barberry, Berberis thunbergii. So basically both barberries are a shrub that grows in forest understories. The reason why there's such a huge issue is because they'll take over that understory of the forest and prevent native tree saplings from being able to grow. They also provide a very good home for, I think it's the white-footed mouse, which carries the black-legged tick, which carries Lyme disease. So both barberries are associated with higher rates of Lyme disease in the state of New York. So that's why this is such a huge issue. But back to IDing, so for Japanese barberry, this is a very good example of like a whorled leaf arrangement on a stem. So the leaves are simple, but they occur in like a whorled pattern. They kind of alternate along the stem. They're shaped kind of like, they look like thumbs to me. Some people say they look like spoons. I don't know. I just think they look like fingertips, what have you. So their leaves they've got like a smooth leaf edge. And then along the stem, alternating with those leaf whorls, as you can see on the bottom left picture, they've got single thorns that come out at the bottom and then alternate with the leaf whorl. They turn this like beautiful bright red color in autumn. And then you've got like, once they start fruiting, you've got these like small clusters of red berries that hang down from them. So, and then moving on to the next barberry, which is the European barberry, Berberis vulgaris, also considered invasive, same reasons, just two different species. I should probably differentiate. Main difference from Japanese barberry is that the leaves are, they've got teeth on them that you can kind of see in this middle top picture on over here. And then another distinctive feature is that instead of one thorn coming out with each whorl, you've got 3 or 2 to 3. And then in the fall, when they fruit, the berries hang in larger clusters. So you can see here there are more berries on this cluster versus if I go back, there are a little bit less on this one.
This is a very popular landscaping plant.
Yeah.
I've seen it sold in nurseries. I'm not sure if it's allowed to be sold in the state of New York, but I'm from Massachusetts and I've definitely seen it there. So this is one that you may not expect to be an invasive species, but yeah, it's good to keep a lookout for, and probably not a good idea to plant in your garden.
Yeah. Also, if you are interested, there is a native barberry. It does not grow this far north. If you go further south, I think it grows there, but you're not, we didn't include that here because if you're in the state of New York, it's not really relevant. You won't see it growing here, but that's just a fun fact.
Yeah. Yeah, so our last species that we're going to talk about is another very popular landscaping species, is the winged burning bush. I see it sometimes called the winged Euonymus by some people because that's its genus name. The Latin name is Euonymus alatus. I never remember that.
Too many vowels.
Yes. But the way that I do this, it looks kind of like nothing like anything I can think of, is that it has these quirky kind of rectangular wings that grow along the young stems. And there's a picture on the top left and then kind of on the right middle-ish.
Yeah, this one here. I don't know if y'all can see my cursor, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty distinctive.
Yeah, so that right there is like the main thing that I use to ID them. It's called a burning bush because it turns like bright pinkish red in the fall and it looks like it's on fire, which is also why it's really popular as a landscaping plant, because it is gorgeous in the fall. It has opposite leaves, so they occur in pairs. The leaves are simple, meaning they just occur one at a time, or one instead of like a bunch of different leaflets coming out of the same spot. They're oval shaped and they're pinnate, so they just have one central vein. If you look at it in the spring, there's some very subtle white flowers, and the fruits are this very like bright orange and has like pink shells that kind of detach from it as they become ripe. So this is an invasive species because it will grow prolifically in forest understories and will pretty much prevent young saplings from growing up and replacing the trees as they get old and die. So it kind of creates a huge generational gap in the forest. and also just is a understory monoculture, so it prevents a lot of other native species from being able to live in their home. So it doesn't like to share, as one of my favorite biology professors likes to describe invasive species.
Yeah, so just to go over some general maintenance and prevention techniques. So before like planting anything, before you get something from a nursery, make sure to check what it is, check to see if it's invasive in the place where you live, and if it is, you probably don't want to plant it there. Also, there are a couple of native plant nurseries that exist out there. If you find a local one in your area, that'd be a great business to support if you're able to. Another way that a lot of vines are dealt with is through cutting. So like, for example, with round leaf bittersweet, usually people will cut it high and then also cut it like as low to the ground as possible. Another way to manage invasive species is through like digging up the roots, especially if it's something that like doesn't spread through underground stems and it's just like one singular thing that you can just pull out by the roots. So an example of that is black swallowwort, but that's not on here. But yeah, you can also mow it or use a brush hog, which is a bigger version of a mower. This is how we manage mugwort on the preserve. We'll map it, and then facilities will come in and mow it to the ground. Yeah.
In addition to that, there's a lot of other like suppression methods, which are really just like preventing sunlight so that it just kills it because they can't get sun. This can include things like landscaping fabric and sheet mulching. Obviously, this doesn't work for every plant, because some plants like Japanese knotweed, if they can grow through concrete, they can definitely grow through a piece of fabric or a piece of cardboard in the case of sheet mulching. So it really kind of depends on the species. Look at it and figure out what makes sense. Another one that's used in combination, usually with cutting and digging or mowing, is shade. A lot of the invasive species around here, except for a couple of the understory plants, but a lot of them really do not do well in the shade. They prefer forest edges or fields. So if you have one of those, it's really good to like combine maybe mowing or cutting with shade. And that is, in a lot of cases, really, really effective. There's also biocontrols that are, it's when researchers will go to the place that these plants are native to, and they'll find an insect that only feeds, or usually an insect, I suppose it could be other things.
Usually insects though.
That can only feed on that one plant, and they'll make sure that it's not going to become an issue here because we don't want another invasive species. But after a decent amount of research, biocontrols can also weaken the plant so it's not so pervasive, and also can try to introduce an ecological balance of things being eaten and kind of like restore it to a good place in its ecology. Mm-hmm. Finally, and we put this at the very end because this is our least favorite option, is herbicides. Like very specific targeted herbicides might be a route that you can do. This makes sense on things where it's really, really difficult to control and there's a lot of it. However, there's also a ton of issues with herbicides, so this should be used really with
very
sparingly
of thought
and very sparingly.
Yeah, I feel like the safest way to use herbicides is, it's very like excruciating work, but if you cut something and then just like apply it to each stem, I think that was a treatment that was done on something at Vassar's Ecological Preserve. I forget what it was, but it was just like very kind of, what's the word I'm looking for?
Spot treatment.
Yeah, that.
The last thing that we're going to end with is a lot of invasive species are brought here because they're edible, or that's like a secondary feature. We are not going to cover that at all in any way here. But if that is something that interests you, there are lots of resources out there, like Facebook groups and lots of really good ID guides and walks you can go on. There are resources out there if you are interested in eating your weeds, and there is such a thing as an invasivore diet if that is your jam.
But yeah, that's all we've got. Thank you all for coming. And now we'll take questions.
All right, that's great. Thank you so much, Echo and Bronwyn. That was really fascinating. Really appreciate that. We already have one question. And again, if anyone else has questions, please put them in the chat or just raise your hand and I'll recognize you. You can ask your question directly, but one moment we're going to hold on one second. We're going to start with one question. It was in the chat and then I'll pivot to you. So the first question you have is, I am sure you will cover garlic mustard at some point. But my question is what to do to get rid of it. I started pulling it out of my yard, and then I read online that sometimes pulling it up spreads the seeds around more than just leaving it. What to do?
Garlic mustard is a tough one, and obviously it's an unsolved problem. And this is not one that I have particular expertise on, and we didn't have enough time to cover all of the major ones, but this was definitely a consideration.
Yeah, I think with garlic mustard, if you're gonna be pulling it out, definitely get it. I feel like getting it before it flowers is a key thing. Also, garlic mustard, younger growth is edible. We made some garlic mustard pesto like a few weeks ago. That was fun. But yeah, I don't think either of us really have a lot of experience with controlling garlic mustard.
Well, I think there's a local cemetery here, a very old one, and then there's a lot of garlic mustard there. And I also am trying to deal with my own yard. And I think I would speak to that. Is like with a lot of these, especially I think with the annuals or perennials, like the big thing is to pull them out before they flower, because that's when the seeds come. So, and what I've been reading is when you rip them out, then throw them in the garbage. Do not put them in a compost pile. Do not, you want them out of the system. You want them out of the ecosystem. So that's one thing. And then also Caroline Fenner is actually the person who asked this question. And I know Caroline posted on Facebook that she made a very delicious garlic mustard pesto as well. So, so she was doing that too.
Yeah.
So here I have, this is from Libert to everyone. We have a problem where our neighbor has planted bamboo in the ground and now it is everywhere. What can we do? Do you all have any advice on that?
Yeah, so I come from in addition to my schooling, I've worked a lot in landscaping, and bamboo is a big one. So first of all, bamboo is actually illegal to sell as a nursery plant in the state of New York. So
really?
Yes, you can get a lot of trouble for selling it, even like informally to your neighbors and stuff, because it is such an invasive plant. So when I was working for a landscaping company about 2 years ago, we had a problem where one of our clients' yards had bamboo. They had mowed it, and the thing that really had worked is that several times a year for a couple years you have to pull everything that you can see out of the ground. It is really, really difficult, but the idea, 20 feet tall. Yeah, you gotta chop that down.
Yeah, mowing's not gonna work. It just
if you can chop that, get it depends on what kind of tools you have at your disposal. But and also that's your neighbor's plant, so it's difficult.
This is an interesting thing. I mean, because one of the things I had heard about is if you basically enclose it, I don't know how deep the roots go. Yeah. So I don't know if this is her neighbor, if there's some way, I mean, good Lord, that would be really labor intensive. But if you were able to bury some kind of barrier to keep it from encroaching on, I mean, would that work?
So there is such thing as a rhizome barrier, which is almost as much work as pulling it out of the ground, but it does exist. Basically, it is this very thick, it's like this thick piece of plastic. It's also very expensive, but you need to, depending on the type of bamboo, you need to dig sometimes like 2 feet into the ground to bury it around the edge. And what's really interesting about bamboo is that it doesn't actually have roots. It has what we call rhizomes, which are basically a modified stem, which is why it is so strong at breaking through things, because it actually is like pushing through with wood rather than through kind of like fibery roots that aren't as strong. It's also why
Same
knotweed
issue with knotweed.
Can go through like concrete and stuff. But there is a very specially developed rhizome barrier that does exist that is an option, but it is hard.
So I'm curious with something like a rhizome, like say if you just kept cutting it, kept cutting, at some point, will the rhizome like basically shrivel up and die because it's not getting any nourishment? I mean, is that a possibility?
You have to go ahead.
I don't know. I think that is a possibility. That is the way we've been trying to manage Japanese knotweed on the preserve. Like we basically just been like cutting it and then like raking it to the center so that the new stems can't sprout anywhere. But basically we're just like trying to exhaust the population, like just kind of make it tired so that it doesn't come back up. But you were going to say something.
There's also, there's a lot of these invasive species are kind of so far beyond the ability to like actually eradicate them. And actually, we work for PRISM, and they have like a tier system of deciding like which ones are eradicatable, which ones are controllable, and which ones are a total lost cause. And so some things are just so widespread and so labor intensive to control that there's not a ton of options available yet, which is when we start to consider things like biocontrols and like other things like that. So in the case of bamboo, you could exhaust it. It would take a lot of years of cutting and pulling, which is what I did with my landscaping group, but it is,
No, I hear you. No, I was just like, we were driving in a local area and you see stands periodically and you go, oh no, like somebody put it in there and then it's just like expanded and you're like, oh, I'm so sorry you did that. So, but we have another question. What about Japanese stillgrass?
That was, do you want to speak on this one?
I'm like not entirely sure what the best management for Japanese stiltgrass is.
Containment.
Containment. I am not entirely sure if it spreads rhizomally. I don't think it does. I think it was one of those ones that's very easy to pull up. I might have read somewhere that like mowing it kind of keeps it in check, but also it does grow in some places that are kind of difficult to mow. So like we've got Japanese stiltgrass at my house. Like I'm from Georgia, and it's I don't even know how to get a mower down there. It depends on like where it's at, but I mean Japanese stiltgrass kind of grows everywhere. Each individual like grass is easy to pull up, but that's also super labor intensive. And I'm not like super knowledgeable about that, unfortunately.
So I have heard incidental evidence. I don't actually know if this is backed up by like multiple replications in multiple places, but I have heard that if you plant a lot of especially native grasses, because their roots are roughly at the same level and so they compete, the native grasses once established can actually outcompete the stiltgrass. So if you want to look for some like wetland friendly native grasses, maybe something like blue stems, or there are some like wetland friendly sedges that might be a good option. But you can kind of, it is something that I suspect can be controlled with plantings.
Maybe like mowing it and then finding native grasses that like wetlands. It's good.
We have a question. Do you have any recommendations on either books or online resources to learn about invasive plants? And if you like, I don't know if you would like to post some links in the chat for people or particular books that you like. That would be wonderful.
I would say the Prism website.
The Prism website is very good.
Is it? Okay.
There's also a field guide that was lying around at the field station. I think it's called Weeds of North America or something like that. It's an ID book. And I think most of the stuff in there is invasive species. So there's that. Okay. Yeah.
And then Lori H says, is there something I can use to kill invasives in my yard that won't harm the birds like the robins that forage in the yard?
So the main thing you want to do as far as birds is just to not use herbicides. When we had our slide with nature time videos, we're making some of those.
Oh yes.
But yeah, it's really, as long as you avoid herbicides, you won't harm the birds. So the best things to do is just mow and cut and shade and like if you can suppress it with wood chips and sheet mulching or something like that.
Yeah, if you've got like vines like the roundleaf bittersweet or porcelain berry, so stuff that likes a lot of light. Some good like fast growing native trees to plant would be like black cherries, cottonwoods if you're near some water. What else? Tulip trees also grow pretty quickly, and you plant these fast growing trees. I feel like that will also further support bird populations.
Yeah.
But yeah.
There's also, I think, a hybrid cottonwood that is one of the fastest growing trees in the world, to my knowledge. As well as there's the hybrid sycamore, the London plane tree is really fast growing as well, and might help you shade out things. Burning, yes, burning is good.
Yeah, we did not include that, but yes, it's a common practice. I feel like that's used on the West Coast with some indigenous groups who are trying to restore like controlled burns and fire cycles to the ecosystem. I think Vassar's Ecological Preserve tried to get permission to use controlled burns there, but we were on fire watch for a while because it was just so dry, I think last year.
Yeah, I'm not sure the details of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, but I heard some news about it, and I don't think we got permission to do that. But controlled burns to control invasive species are a thing.
Yeah, a lot of ecosystems are adapted to people burning and low to moderate amounts. So, yes.
Yeah.
One thing to be mindful of is that you do not want to be burning poison ivy, poison oak, poison sumac, because it will send those oils airborne, get in your eyes, on your skin. So don't ever burn that stuff. Yes.
Yeah, be very intentional with your burning, which just is good practice in general. But yes, I did. That is a good point.
Adriana did a shout out to Hudson Highlands Land Trust Nature Time videos.
Oh yeah, Adriana is one of our partner interns.
One of the partner interns. Yeah.
Thank you.
I work with Shrub Preservation in Hudson Highlands, and we collaborate with Bronwyn and Echo. So I guess if Bronwyn and Echo get confused, I can answer maybe some questions too.
All right, awesome. And actually at this point, I think we've come to the end of the questions in the chat. I'm just looking, does anybody have any additional questions that they'd like to put out there? Well, if not, I think we've come to the end of this. I think this is fascinating for all of us because we're all dealing with this. I have a side yard full of mugwort, so I'm going to go, I will deal with it. Absolutely. Actually, one question that I had, I'm just curious in your studies, if you feel, because I now know, like being an on again, off again gardener, that I have literally introduced invasives to my yard because I bought things as like, that looks pretty, and I put them in, and now they're insane. And so my question is, like, in your studies, do you feel that, or has this been addressed at all, that on a commercial level, that there has been an understanding or an embracing of the fact, like we shouldn't sell this stuff, like, or at least in certain areas of the country, we shouldn't sell this stuff because once it gets in, it's going to explode. Is there any sense that there's been any change in thinking on that?
I feel like in a lot of mainstream commercial like gardening, there really hasn't been, at least not from where I can see, at least where I'm from. There are a lot of like larger department stores that have like that sell gardening stuff. So I don't really have a whole lot of like, I guess like native plant nurseries around where I'm from. But I feel like there are a lot of places in like the state of New York and then also in Massachusetts and a lot of the Northeast that have more like native plant nurseries emerging, and there's been like kind of a greater understanding at a smaller scale. But I feel like, I don't know, I feel like there's still a lot of momentum from just the past, like what, 100 years or so.
Right.
People just being like, well, this is a pretty plant, we'll sell it, you know?
It's true. So I'll just put it out there. It's like, do your research, because I got some stuff that I like there. It's now like yearly maintenance, like cutting it to the ground, ripping it out. And some of these things, once they're in, they're really hard to pull out because they just, poison ivy is one. I mean, that's natural. It's, it happens to be a native, but you try and pull poison ivy out, it just breaks. And there are a lot of vines and sort of things that spread that way that you go to pull them and they just break at the ground. And, so to be mindful of that. And so there are, I think within our area, there are a lot of native plant, there's a greater mindfulness, I think, within the local nurseries of identifying plants that they're selling as natives. So to be on the lookout for that. And then also I want to give a shout out because within the Conservation Advisory Commission, one of our members, Susan Carnes-Heck, was really in a leadership position and got Town of Poughkeepsie involved in the Pollinator Pathway Program. So there is a Town of Poughkeepsie page on pollinatorpathways.org. So you can go look there. You can register your garden there as part of the pollinator pathway. So I really encourage you to do that as well. So so beyond that, here's another one to everyone. Any recommendations for firms that can handle installing these bamboo barriers?
I'm not super familiar with the bamboo with rhizome barriers. I feel like
I've done most of my landscaping in the state of Massachusetts, so it's a little far for you guys. But I think if you just call around and ask landscaping groups if they'd be willing to, if they know what it is, you're probably in good hands.
I think this is a familiar problem. I mean, because I see it. I see stands of it. So I would think you may have to call around a bit, but I'm sure people and landscapers have come up against this issue. So, and then we just have Ilana saying, I recommend Catskills Native Nursery and Earth Tones Native Nursery, both amazing places that support native plants. Adams carries some native plants too, but they carry many non-natives too, so be wary. So absolutely. So any other comments, any other hands up? Okay, Echo and Bronwyn, thank you so much. This was really informative and really enjoyed your expertise. Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
All righty. All right. Thank you everybody for being here, and good night.